Bitcoin is actually money for the people, run by the people. Now let's look at what happens when we take money out of the control of banks, corporations, and governments and back to you and me, the people. What happens when money becomes decentralized and we control it? Actually, a whole lot happens. And we're going to talk about three of those major advantages, the three F's. Let's start with financial fairness. Tell me, what was the greatest bank robbery of all time? I thought about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or Bonnie and Clyde, or John Dillinger. But you know, they're not even close to the biggest bank robbery. In fact, all the bank robbers of all time don't come close to this particular theft. Just watch this. Yes, that's right. The biggest robber for our monetary system is the banks themselves. There are dozens of ways they steal your money. We are limited on time to elaborate on all of them here, but Scott Rose has actually documented 129 ways that banks take your money. There's just one, and perhaps this is the easiest way they take your money, and that's inflation. Here's what the great economist John Maynard Keynes said about inflation. Through inflation, the government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft. Now, this quote from John Maynard Keynes should have a red flashing warning light above it, because that's what it is. Yet our banking systems didn't see a warning light. Instead, they took it as an operations manual. I assume you know the Federal Reserve is allowed to print money, which is backed by nothing. Yes, it used to be gold, but it hasn't been that for a long, long time. In fact, since Bitcoin was created in 2008, the Federal Reserve has printed over $6 trillion, again, backed by nothing. So what happens when you suddenly have a lot more money, yet the same amount of goods? The price goes up. That's inflation. You see, when the bank makes loans to countries and often people, they simply print the money. When the Fed buys bonds, again, they generally print the money to buy the bonds. Remember when bonds were a real safe and conservative investment? The more they print money for various loans and purchases, the more they devalue your money. I remember when a $5 or $10 bill in my pocket made me think I was rich, especially a 20. Well, let's see what those 20s and 10s and 5s now buy. Look at the buying power of money over the last 100 years. Notice that your consumer dollar has lost 96% of the purchasing power since 1913. What $1,000 in 2013 can buy is about $40 in 1913 goods. $1,000 in 1913 could buy 2 cars for a family, his and hers. Here's how much car you can buy today for $1,000. And look at the shopping cart and see just what has happened to your purchasing power. So inflation is hurting you directly in your pocketbook, and more importantly, your purchasing power. Printing money that isn't backed by anything is what causes this problem, inflation. By the way, if you or I printed money for whatever reason, we'd be thrown in jail for counterfeiting. Yet the banks and the Federal Reserve get away with this crime every day. Now, did you notice the details of that inflation chart was provided by the U.S. government? The government, or Federal Reserve Bank, has also told us that inflation is on target this year at 3% annually, which, by the way, is not accurate. They don't include in their calculations things like food and gas. Are those necessary items? Remember the shopping cart illustration? If you were to add those figures, the true inflation rate would be closer to 7 to 10%. Does that not seem more accurate to you? I feel when they say inflation is on target, it's a lot like asking the fox who is guarding the hen house, "Hey, how's everything going in there?" To which he replies, often with a burp, "Fine. Chicken attrition is on target." The fox is doing just fine. But the chickens? By the way, we're the chickens. So, if you've been saving for years, perhaps have an eroding pension or some form of a fixed income stream later in life, what is inflation doing for your retirement? Exactly a direct path to Walmart greeter. Just to keep the fox happy. I think former President Ronald Reagan was a lot more accurate when he said, "Inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman." This is where you should listen carefully so you can pull your chin up off the floor. This is one of the biggest advantages of Bitcoin, if not the biggest benefit for you. Bitcoin cannot be devalued through inflation. Why? They can't be printed out of thin air. There's a finite amount of Bitcoin that will ever be printed. That's 21 million, ever. So far, there's been almost 18 million distributed. By the way, that's enough to run the global economy because Bitcoin is divisible by 100 million. You and I can spend or transact 1/1000th or 1/100th, just like we spend $1, $10, or $100. It can be even divisible much smaller than that, the equivalent of our pennies and far smaller. So there are plenty in place without having to inflate them. Now, everyone and anyone can earn Bitcoin equally. You can sell your services or goods for Bitcoin. You can exchange your fiat currency for Bitcoin. Become a Bitcoin miner and receive fresh Bitcoin every 10 minutes. By the way, that's one of the best and safest ways to get involved with Bitcoin. Just briefly, miners, I don't mean young children, protect the Bitcoin network with that series of millions of computers I was telling you about earlier, and they can earn rewards for doing so. We'll talk about that later.